What's the point of sadness? Not just the passing disappointment when plans fall through, not the mild melancholy of a rainy afternoon. I'm talking about real sadness. The kind that settles into your chest like a weight. The kind that slows everything down. Your movements, your thoughts, your voice. The kind that makes you want to withdraw, to be alone, to stop trying. Every other emotion has an obvious purpose. Fear keeps you safe. Anger defends you. Joy motivates you. But sadness seems like pure dysfunction, a system error in your psychological software, something that holds you back, drags you down, makes life harder without offering anything in return. And yet sadness is universal. Every human culture has words for it. Every human who's ever lived has felt it. It's woven so deeply into the human experience that we write songs about it, paint it, and build monuments to it. We treat sadness as meaningful, even as we wish it would go away. So here's the question that should bother you. Why would evolution preserve something that seems so useless? Why would natural selection keep an emotion that makes you slower, weaker, less motivated to survive, unless sadness isn't useless? Unless it's doing something your conscious mind can't see. Something so important that your ancestors who couldn't feel sad properly didn't survive long enough to become your ancestors. Here's what we know about sadness. It's metabolically expensive. When you're deeply sad, your body slows down. Your movements become heavier. Your voice drops. Your facial expressions flatten. You lose interest in things that usually motivate you: food, sex, social connection, exploration, achievement. From a survival perspective, this seems catastrophic. You're making yourself less competitive, less attractive as a mate, less useful to your group, less able to spot and respond to threats. Every aspect of sadness seems to reduce your fitness, and yet it persists. It's not a side effect of something else. It's not a malfunction. Sadness is a distinct, evolved emotion with its own neural circuitry, its own hormonal cascade, its own behavioral program. Evolution built sadness deliberately, carefully, at great cost, which means it must be doing something important enough that the benefits outweigh all those obvious costs. But what? What could sadness possibly be doing that's worth all this dysfunction? What problem does it solve that's so critical that natural selection kept it around, despite the fact that it makes you want to give up? That's what we're going to explore tonight. Not just where sadness came from, but what it's for, what it's trying to tell you, what it's trying to make you do. Because once you understand sadness as a tool rather than a burden, as a solution rather than a problem, it starts to make sense. Uncomfortable sense, perhaps, but sense nonetheless. If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. So maybe subscribe and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always check the comments and it's fascinating. Someone in Santiago settling in after sunset, someone in Oslo in the deep winter dark, someone in Singapore in the humid night. All of us lying in our separate darknesses, feeling this ancient weight that connects us not just to each other, but to every human who's ever lived, every ancestor who felt this same slowing, this same heaviness, and whose sadness somehow, mysteriously, helped them survive long enough to create the next generation, to eventually create you. So get comfortable, let your body sink into whatever's holding you. You don't need to fight the sadness if it's there. You don't need to fix it or understand it completely or make it go away. Just let it be there while we explore where it came from, what it was for, why it still visits, even though the world it evolved for doesn't exist anymore. Over the next 2 hours, we're going to trace sadness back to its origins. We're going to walk through the moments in human evolution when feeling sad meant the difference between survival and extinction. When that slowing down, that withdrawal, that heaviness that feels so pointless now actually saved lives. We're going to explore the different types of sadness, the different messages each one carries, the different problems each one evolved to solve, and then we're going to look at what happens when you take an emotion calibrated for the social world of small bands of hunter-gatherers and drop it into modern life, where you can feel profoundly sad about situations your ancestors never had to face, and maybe by the end, you'll have a different relationship with your sadness. Not love for it, not gratitude necessarily, but perhaps understanding, perhaps acceptance, perhaps the recognition that this heavy feeling, as difficult as it is part of your inheritance as a human being. Part of what it means to have a brain and a heart capable of caring about things deeply enough that their loss can slow you down. Picture this. It's 150,000 years ago, somewhere in East Africa, in the late afternoon light that turns everything gold before darkness falls. A small band of early humans, maybe 20 individuals, is settling into their evening routine. Children playing near the fire, adults preparing food, the usual sounds of human social life, conversation, laughter. The small conflicts and reconciliations that happen when people live in close proximity. But one woman is sitting apart, not far away, still within the circle of the group, but separate. Her posture tells you everything. Shoulders curved inward, head down, movements slow, almost reluctant. She's preparing food, but mechanically, without the usual rhythm and efficiency. Her face, if you could see it clearly in the fading light, would show little expression. Not quite blank, but muted, as if someone had turned down the intensity of everything she's feeling. She's lost someone, a child perhaps, or a partner, or maybe just watched someone she cared about leave the group, choosing to join another band, and she knows she'll probably never see them again. In a world before writing, before long-distance communication, before any technology that could maintain connections across space and time, losing someone often meant losing them permanently. Death and distance were almost equivalent in their finality, and now she's deeply, profoundly sad. The kind of sadness that makes everything feel harder, that makes her want to withdraw, to be still, to stop engaging with the world for a while. The kind of sadness that would seem at first glance like the worst possible response to loss. Because loss in the prehistoric world was dangerous. Every member of the group mattered. Every person contributed to collective survival. You couldn't afford to have someone withdraw, to stop contributing, to become a burden rather than an asset. And yet there she sits, slowed down, withdrawn, sad. And the group allows this, accepts it. They don't demand that she snap out of it. They don't tell her to be productive, to contribute, to pull her weight. They adjust around her temporary diminishment. They let her be sad. Why? Why would a group operating on the thin edge of survival tolerate a member becoming temporarily less functional? What purpose could this possibly serve? Here's what's remarkable. That woman's sadness is doing several things simultaneously. Things that aren't immediately obvious, but that mattered immensely in the social world of early humans. Things that still matter now, even though we've largely forgotten what sadness is for. First, her sadness is a signal. A clear, unmistakable communication to everyone around her that something is wrong. That she's experienced a loss. That she needs something from the group, even if she can't articulate exactly what. In a world before language, or even after language emerged, but long before humans became comfortable talking about their feelings, sadness was a universal signal. Everyone recognized it. Everyone understood at some level what it meant. Someone is hurting, someone has lost something important, someone needs care. This matters more than you might think, because early human groups survived through cooperation, through mutual support, through the willingness of group members to help each other when help was needed. But you can't help if you don't know help is needed. And in the constant busyness of survival, in the daily demands of finding food and water and shelter and safety, it would be easy to miss that someone is struggling unless they had a clear way to signal it. Sadness is that signal. The slowed movements, the withdrawn posture, the muted expression, the reduced engagement with the world, all of it broadcasts, I am not okay. I have experienced something that has temporarily broken my ability to function normally. I need support. And the group responds, not because they're being altruistic or morally good, but because this is how human groups survived. By noticing when members were struggling and adjusting to support them, knowing that tomorrow it might be someone else who needs support, might be you who needs the group to carry you for a while. Second, her sadness is slowing her down, and this, paradoxically, is adaptive. Because when you've experienced a major loss, when your world has shifted in a fundamental way, one of the worst things you can do is keep moving forward as if nothing has changed. You need to stop. You need to process. You need to reorganize your understanding of the world and your place in it. This is what sadness forces you to do. It takes away your motivation to engage in normal activities. It makes you want to be still, to withdraw, to stop interacting with the external world so you can turn inward. And during that withdrawal, your brain is working. It's processing the loss, it's adjusting your mental models, it's figuring out how to exist in a world where something or someone that used to be present is now absent. In modern terms, we might call this depression, especially if it lasts too long or goes too deep. But in evolutionary terms, it's adaptive shutdown. A temporary pause that allows for necessary reorganization. Your brain is running maintenance. It's updating its models of the world, its expectations, its plans for the future, and it needs you to be still while it does this work. Third, and this is subtle but crucial, her sadness is testing the group's bonds. It's checking whether the social relationships she's invested in are real, whether the group will support her when she can't immediately contribute, whether the mutual aid network that holds the group together will function when she needs it. This might sound cynical, but it's not. It's just realistic. In a world where your survival depended on the group, you needed to know whether the group was truly there for you, whether the relationships were strong enough to survive temporary one-sidedness, whether people would help you when you couldn't help yourself. Sadness creates that test. It puts you in a vulnerable position and sees what happens, and the group's response gives you crucial information. If they support you, if they adjust their expectations, if they carry you through the difficult period, you learn that your social bonds are strong, that your investments in these relationships have been reciprocated, that you're safe in this group. But if they don't, if they demand that you continue functioning, if they withdraw support or threaten to exclude you, you learn something different. You learn that your position in the group is conditional, that you need to find different relationships or different ways to secure your survival. This information, as painful as it might be to receive, is valuable. Better to know now than to discover it in a more critical situation. So there she sits, in the golden light of late afternoon 150,000 years ago. Sad, slow, withdrawn. And through her sadness, she's doing complex social and psychological work. She's signaling her need, she's processing her loss, she's testing her bonds, she's doing all the things that sadness evolved to do. And the group, because they've evolved alongside her, because their ancestors were shaped by the same forces that shaped hers, they understand at some level what her sadness means. They know what to do. They make space for her withdrawal. They reduce their expectations. They offer small gestures of support. They let her be bound. This is what sadness looked like in its original context. This is what it was for. A signal, a pause, a test. A necessary response to loss that served multiple adaptive functions in the social world of early humans. But here's where it gets complicated. Here's where understanding the evolutionary purpose of sadness becomes both comforting and troubling at the same time, because you still have that sadness, that same ancient response, and it still does all the things it evolved to do. It still signals to others that you're struggling. It still slows you down to force processing. It still tests your social bonds by putting you in a vulnerable position and seeing who responds. But the world it evolved for, that world of small, stable, face-to-face groups where everyone knew everyone and social bonds were tested daily through constant interaction, that world doesn't exist anymore. You live in a world of weak ties and distant connections, of relationships mediated through technology, of groups so large and fluid that signaling your sadness to the group doesn't even make sense because there's no coherent group to signal to. And yet your sadness still fires, still tries to do its ancient work, still slows you down and makes you withdraw and broadcast your struggle to anyone paying attention. But now the response you get, if you get any response at all, often doesn't match what your sadness is expecting. The ancient contract between sad individual and supportive group has been broken, or at least severely modified, And your sadness doesn't know how to adapt. This is why modern sadness can feel so pointless, so dysfunctional, so much like pure suffering without purpose. Because the mechanisms are still there, still trying to operate, but the social context they were designed for has changed beyond recognition. The woman sitting by the fire 150,000 years ago, her sadness made sense. It worked. It got her what she needed. But you lying in your bed tonight feeling that same slowing, that same heaviness, you're trying to run ancient software in a modern operating system. And the bugs and crashes and error messages you experience, they're not because your sadness is broken. They're because the world changed faster than evolution could keep up. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can understand why sadness misfires in modern life, we need to understand more about what it is, what its different forms are, how it evolved not just once but multiple times in response to different pressures, solving different problems, how it became one of the most complex and nuanced emotions in the human repertoire. Because sadness isn't one thing, it's a family of related responses, each calibrated for different types of loss, each carrying different messages, each evolved to handle different adaptive problems, and until you understand this complexity, until you can recognize which type of sadness is visiting you at any given moment, you can't fully understand what it's trying to do, or why it feels the way it does. Let's pause here for a moment. Let your breathing deepen. Feel the weight of your body against whatever's holding you. The sadness we've been talking about, if you're feeling it now, is not going anywhere immediately. And that's okay. You don't need to fix it or understand it completely or make it disappear. It's just doing what it evolved to do. Signaling, slowing, testing, trying to help in the only ways it knows how. In a few moments, we're going to walk deeper into the evolutionary history of sadness. We're going to trace the different types, the different purposes, the different messages. We're going to see how something that feels like pure burden, pure heaviness, pure suffering actually represents a sophisticated set of adaptations that kept your ancestors alive in circumstances that would break most modern humans if they tried to face them. But for now, just rest, just breathe. The story of your sadness is just beginning. And like sadness itself, the story moves slowly, deliberately, with patience for the weight of what we're carrying. Your ancestors sat with their sadness 150,000 years ago, in the golden light of African afternoons, surrounded by people who understood what sadness meant even if they couldn't name it. You can sit with yours now, in a different time, a different place, but carrying the same ancient weight, the same signal, the same slow necessary work of processing loss and testing bonds and adjusting to a world that has changed. The sadness in you recognizes the sadness in them, across vast stretches of time, across the chasm between their world and yours. You're connected by this feeling, this heavy, slow, ancient feeling that has never left the human experience because it was, and perhaps still is, necessary, essential, part of what it means to be human. But we're not done yet. We've only just begun to explore where this feeling comes from. Because sadness, as complex as it already seems, is even more layered, even more sophisticated, even more essential to human survival than what we've covered so far. There are different types of sadness, each with its own evolutionary history, each solving different problems, each carrying different messages. So settle in, let your breathing slow. The story of your sadness is unfolding. And with each layer we uncover, with each evolutionary pressure we trace, with each adaptive function we discover, you might find that this heavy feeling, the burden you've been carrying, starts to make more sense. Not pleasant sense, not comfortable sense, but sense nonetheless. The long night of human evolution had many sadnesses, and you carry them all. Let's walk through them together, slowly, carefully, honouring the weight of what you feel by understanding where it came from and what it was trying to do when trying to do something actually mattered for survival. Now, let's go deeper, because sadness, as we've begun to see, isn't a single monolithic emotion. It's more like a family, a collection of related feelings, each with its own texture, its own purpose, its own evolutionary history. and understanding which member of the family is visiting you at any given moment, that can help you make sense of what you're experiencing and why. Let's start with the most ancient form of sadness, the most primal, the one that probably existed before humans were fully human, before language, before complex culture, before almost anything we'd recognize as distinctively human behavior, the sadness of loss, of death, what we call grief. Picture yourself as an early hominid, maybe 4 million years ago. Not human yet, not even close, but social, living in small groups, forming attachments to others, particularly to your young, to your mates, to the few individuals you've known your entire life. The savannah stretches endlessly around you, gold grass swaying in the wind, acacia trees scattered like dark punctuation marks against the sky. And someone you've been attached to is gone, dead, killed by a predator maybe, or by disease, or by accident, or simply by the hard mathematics of life in a world without medicine or safety nets or any protection beyond what the group itself could provide. Your brain knows this person should be there. It expects them. It has patterns, neural pathways, that fire when you see them, when you interact with them, when you simply exist in their presence. These patterns were carved by hundreds of thousands of interactions over years of living together. They're not thoughts exactly. They're deeper than thoughts. They're the structure of how your brain organizes the world. And now that structure is wrong. The patterns fire, expecting something that will never come. The neural pathways reach out for connections that no longer exist. Your brain keeps looking for someone who isn't there anymore, will never be there anymore. This is devastating at a purely mechanical level. Your brain is trying to function with a model of the world that no longer matches reality. Every time you expect to see that person and they are not there, you experience a prediction error. Your brain predicted one thing and got another. And these prediction errors, when they're frequent and fundamental enough, they create a signal of distress, a signal that something is deeply wrong. This is grief. Not the complex, culturally shaped grief of modern humans with our rituals and our stages and our expectations about how mourning should look, but the raw biological response to the absence of someone who should be present. The brain's way of saying something fundamental is missing. The world is not as it should be. I need to reorganize everything. And what does grief do? It slows you down dramatically. Takes away your appetite, your energy, your interest in the world. It makes you want to be still, to withdraw, to stop engaging with everything else while your brain does the massive work of reorganizing itself around this absence. In modern terms, this looks dysfunctional. Someone dies and you can't get out of bed, you can't work, you can't take care of basic tasks. You feel like you're broken, like you should be able to function better. Like this level of shutdown is disproportionate to what happened. But in evolutionary terms, this shutdown is necessary. Your brain is running a major update. It's rewriting the code that structures how you understand and navigate the world. And it needs you to be still while it does this work. Because if you kept trying to function normally, while your brain is rewriting its foundational assumptions about reality, you'd make mistakes. Dangerous mistakes. Mistakes that could get you killed. So grief forces you to stop, to be still, to let the reorganization happen. And the group, because they've evolved to recognize grief because their ancestors survived by supporting grieving members, they allow this. They carry you for a while, they reduce expectations, they accept that you're temporarily diminished, and they adjust around that reality. This is what grief was for, not to make you feel better, not to help you move on, but to force you to stop long enough to let your brain reorganize around a fundamental change in your reality. The sadness of grief is your brain's way of protecting you from the danger of operating with outdated models of the world, and it's still with you. When you lose someone important, when death takes someone you love, your brain still goes through this process. The same ancient mechanism fires, the same shutdown happens, the same signal broadcast to anyone paying attention, and you experience it as crushing, overwhelming sadness that makes everything feel impossible. This isn't dysfunction. This is your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do, forcing a pause, demanding reorganization, making sure you don't try to navigate a changed world with unchanged assumptions. But there's another type of sadness, related to grief but distinct, evolved for different circumstances, solving a different problem. Let's move forward in time. Let's come to humans who are more recognizably human, maybe 100,000 years ago. Language exists, though it's simple. Culture exists. Groups have territories, alliances, conflicts, and within groups there are hierarchies, status differences. Some people have more influence, more respect, more access to resources than others. And you, in this scenario, you've just been defeated. Maybe in a physical fight, maybe in a social confrontation, maybe you tried to assert status or claim resources or pursue a mate, and you were shut down. Publicly, definitively, in a way that everyone in the group witnessed. And now you feel it, a different kind of sadness than grief. Not the crushing absence of something that should be there, but something more like deflation, like your sense of yourself has been physically diminished, like you've been made smaller by what happened. This is the sadness of defeat, of lowered status, of social loss that doesn't involve death, but that still represents a fundamental change in your position in the group. And it evolved for a very specific reason. In hierarchical groups, fighting is dangerous. Physically dangerous, obviously, because fights can cause injury or death, but also socially dangerous, because constant conflict destabilizes the group, makes cooperation harder, creates factions and resentments that can fragment the group entirely. So most social animals evolved ways to end conflicts without fighting to the death. Dominance displays, submission signals, ways of establishing hierarchy without everyone dying in the process. And sadness, the sadness of defeat, is part of that system. When you're defeated, when your bid for status fails, the sadness you feel does several things. First, it signals submission. It broadcasts to everyone, including the person who defeated you, that you accept the outcome, that you're not going to keep fighting, that you recognize their superior status, and you're withdrawing your challenge. This matters because it allows the winner to also withdraw, to not have to escalate further, to not have to actually injure or kill you to establish their dominance. Your sadness is a white flag, a signal that the conflict is over and the hierarchy is established, and everyone can now get back to the business of cooperation. Second, that sadness changes your behavior. It makes you less assertive, less likely to challenge, less likely to put yourself forward. It keeps you in a lower status position for a while, giving the social situation time to stabilize, preventing immediate reconflict. And third, it motivates you to rebuild, to find other ways to gain status that don't involve direct confrontation with whoever defeated you, to invest in different relationships, to develop different skills, to look for opportunities in other domains. The sadness of defeat isn't permanent shutdown like grief. It's temporary deflation, followed by strategic redirection. This is why when you experience defeat in modern life, when you fail at something public and important, when you're rejected or humiliated or shut down in front of others, you feel that particular kind of sadness, that sense of being diminished, of wanting to withdraw, of not wanting to be seen or to put yourself forward. That's ancient defeat sadness. That's your brain recognizing that you've lost a status competition and responding in the way that kept your ancestors alive, by signaling submission, by reducing your assertiveness temporarily, by motivating you to find other paths to success. The problem, of course, is that modern defeats often aren't the same as ancient defeats. You can fail in one domain without it meaning anything about your overall status or survival. You can be rejected by one person without it affecting your access to resources or mates. You can lose one competition without it determining your entire future. But your sadness doesn't know that. It responds to perceived defeat with the same mechanism that evolved for small group hierarchies where defeat actually mattered for survival. So you feel diminished in ways that might be disproportionate to the actual stakes. You want to withdraw in situations where withdrawal might actually make things worse. You experience sadness that's calibrated for a world where status was survival and defeat could be devastating. Now let's talk about another type of sadness, one that's more subtle but perhaps even more pervasive in modern life. The sadness of separation, of social disconnection, of finding yourself on the outside of the group even temporarily. Picture yourself again, maybe 80,000 years ago. The group has been travelling for days, following game, looking for a new water source, and somewhere in the confusion of movement, in the chaos of a night camp, you've become separated. Not permanently, not lost, just left behind. The group moved on at dawn and you were sleeping too deeply, or you were too far from the main camp, or you just didn't wake up in time. And now you're alone. The sun is rising. You look around. No one. You call out. No answer. You try to track them, but you're not the best tracker, and the ground is hard and you're not sure which direction they went. And slowly, as the morning advances, as you search and call and find nothing, it settles over you. You're alone, separated from the only source of safety you've ever known. This triggers a specific kind of sadness, not grief because no one has died, not defeat because you haven't lost status, but separation sadness. The distress of being cut off from the social network that has always been your survival context. And this sadness is powerful, almost overwhelming. It's not just I'm lonely, it's I'm going to die if I don't find them. Because in the prehistoric world, being alone was genuinely life-threatening. You were vulnerable to predators, unable to hunt effectively, without access to collective knowledge about where food and water could be found. Alone was dangerous in ways we can barely imagine now. So separation sadness has a very specific function. It motivates reunion. It makes you desperate to find the group again. It drives you to take risks, to keep searching, to not settle down and wait, but to actively pursue reconnection. The sadness is aversive enough that you'll do almost anything to make it stop. And what makes it stop is finding the group again, re-establishing connection, getting back to safety. But it also does something else. It signals to the group, if they notice you're missing, that they should look for you. Your distress calls, your obvious sadness when you finally reunite, these things reinforce the group's commitment to staying together. They create empathy. They remind everyone that losing a member is serious, that separation is distressing, that the group needs to be more careful about keeping everyone together. This is still with you. When you feel disconnected from your social network, when you feel like you're on the outside, when relationships feel distant or fragile or lost, you experience separation sadness. That specific flavor of distress that comes from sensing that your social bonds are weakened or broken. And in modern life, this can be triggered constantly. You can feel separated while surrounded by people, if those people feel distant or disinterested. You can feel disconnected in a crowded city, isolated in a busy workplace, alone in a relationship that has gone cold. Because separation sadness isn't really about physical proximity. It's about feeling that your social bonds are secure, that you're integrated into a network that will catch you if you fall. When those bonds feel insecure, when that network seems fragile, when you sense that you might be on your own if things go wrong, separation sadness activates. And it feels terrible. It makes you want to reach out, to reconnect, to re-establish bonds. It drives you to maintain relationships even when they are difficult, to invest in social ties even when they're costly, to prioritize connection over almost everything else. Because for 300,000 years, separation from the group was one of the most dangerous situations a human could face. And your sadness, your ancient separation sadness, it remembers. It treats social disconnection as an emergency, and it motivates you, sometimes desperately, to restore connection before it's too late. Think about that for a moment. Let it settle. These different sadnesses, grief and defeat and separation, they're all still active in you. All still responding to cues that suggest loss or diminishment or disconnection. All still trying to do the work they evolved to do: signal, slow you down, motivate specific responses, test bonds, force reorganization. But there's one more type of sadness we need to explore, the newest one, the most uniquely human, the one that probably couldn't exist until humans developed the capacity for complex, abstract thought, for imagination, for the ability to think about possibilities rather than just actualities. This is existential sadness. The sadness that comes from awareness itself, from consciousness of your own limitations, your own mortality, your own inability to have everything you want or be everything you could be. The sadness that emerges from the gap between what is and what could be, between reality and imagination. Let's come forward to maybe 50,000 years ago. Language is fully developed now. Culture is complex. Humans have art, ritual, symbolic thought. And with these capacities comes a new and terrible awareness. The awareness that life is finite. That choices foreclose other choices. That every path taken is dozens of paths not taken. That death awaits at the end, no matter what you do. That meaning is not given, but must be created. That nothing is guaranteed and everything can be lost. This awareness, this capacity for abstract thought about past and future and possibility and impossibility, it's one of humanity's greatest gifts. It allows for planning, innovation, culture, technology, everything that makes humans unique. But it also creates a new kind of pain, a new kind of sadness, one that doesn't come from any specific loss, but from the general condition of being a conscious, finite being in an uncertain world. This existential sadness doesn't fit neatly into evolutionary psychology. It's harder to explain what adaptive function it serves, but perhaps it evolved as a byproduct of other adaptive traits. The same brain that can imagine future dangers, that can plan for contingencies, that can think abstractly about possibility, that brain inevitably also becomes aware of its own limitations, of the fundamental constraints of existence, of the impossibility of having everything or being everything or even fully understanding everything. And this awareness creates sadness, not acute sadness usually, not the crushing weight of grief or the deflation of defeat or the desperation of separation, but a background sadness, a quiet melancholy that colours experience, an awareness of loss even when nothing specific has been lost, a sense that something is missing even when you can't name what it is. Some researchers think this existential sadness actually does serve a function, that it motivates meaning-making, that the discomfort of meaninglessness, of awareness without purpose, drives humans to create purpose, to build cultures and tell stories and develop rituals and philosophies and religions, and all the other ways humans try to make sense of existence. The sadness of existing without inherent meaning might be what drives us to create meaning. The awareness of mortality might be what motivates us to leave legacies. The sense that something is missing might be what keeps us searching, building, connecting, trying to fill the unfillable gap between what we are and what we wish we could be. This is the newest sadness, the most distinctively human, and it's the hardest to understand or accept or make peace with. Because it doesn't come from circumstances you can change. It comes from the structure of consciousness itself, from being aware enough to know that awareness isn't enough, from being intelligent enough to understand your own limitations, from being alive enough to know that life ends. You might be feeling this right now, not grief for someone specific, not defeat from some particular failure, not separation from an identifiable group, but just sadness, a general heaviness, an awareness that things are not as they could be, that life is harder than it should be, that something essential is missing even though you can't say what. This is existential sadness. And unlike the other forms of sadness we've discussed, this one doesn't have a clear evolutionary purpose. It's more like the price of admission for being human, the cost of having a brain sophisticated enough to think about thinking, to imagine alternatives, to be aware of awareness itself. So here you are, carrying multiple forms of sadness, each with its own origin, its own purpose, its own message. The crushing reorganization of grief, the deflation of defeat, the desperation of separation, the quiet melancholy of existential awareness. All of them still active. All of them still responding to cues from your modern life in ways that were calibrated for ancient contexts. And here's what makes this so difficult. These different sadnesses often overlap, blend together. A specific loss might trigger grief, but it might also trigger separation sadness if that loss weakens your social network. Defeat in one area might activate existential sadness about your limitations and mortality. Separation might recall old griefs, old losses, deepening the current pain with echoes of past pain. Your sadness is complex, layered. Multiple ancient systems firing simultaneously, sometimes reinforcing each other, sometimes creating complicated emotional experiences that you can't quite name or understand because there are actually several different evolutionary adaptations happening at once. This is why sadness can be so confusing, so hard to identify or articulate or explain. You're not experiencing one thing. You're experiencing the accumulated weight of multiple evolutionary solutions to different survival problems, all active in a brain that evolved to handle each one separately, but that now has to process all of them in a world that doesn't match the context any of them evolved for. Let's pause here again. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body relax into whatever's supporting it. The sadness we've been exploring in all its varieties, it's doing what it evolved to do. Signaling, reorganizing, motivating, testing, forcing you to pay attention to losses and defeats and separations and limitations that your ancestors needed to pay attention to in order to survive. You don't need to fix these different sadnesses. You don't need to understand them completely or make them go away. Just recognizing them, identifying which type is present, understanding that each one evolved for specific purposes in specific contexts, that might be enough. Might give you some purchase on experiences that can otherwise feel overwhelmingly heavy and meaningless. In a few moments, we're going to look at how these ancient sadnesses play out in modern life, how they misfire and overlap and create suffering that seems disproportionate to any identifiable cause, how the world has changed faster than evolution could adapt, leaving you with emotional responses calibrated for circumstances that no longer exist. But for now, just rest with this understanding. You carry multiple sadnesses, each one ancient, each one evolved to solve real problems, each one still trying to do its job even though the world has changed so much that its job often doesn't make sense anymore. Your ancestors needed these sadnesses, needed to be slowed down by grief so they could reorganize, needed to be deflated by defeat so conflicts could end without death, needed to be desperate about separation so they stayed connected to life-saving groups, needed perhaps to feel existential melancholy so they would create meaning in a universe that provides none. You inherited these needs, these responses, these ancient, complex, layered sadnesses, and you carry them forward into a world that doesn't understand them, doesn't expect them, doesn't always know what to do with them. But you understand them now, at least a little better than you did. You understand that sadness isn't one thing, but many things, that each type serves different functions, that what feels like meaningless suffering actually represents sophisticated evolutionary solutions to real survival problems. This understanding doesn't make sadness pleasant, doesn't make it go away, but perhaps it makes it less mysterious, less like random punishment and more like ancient inheritance, less like personal failure and more like species history. The woman sitting by the fire 150,000 years ago, feeling grief for her lost child, her sadness made sense. The man deflated by defeat in a status conflict 100,000 years ago, his sadness made sense. The person separated from their group 80,000 years ago, desperate to reunite, their sadness made sense. The human 50,000 years ago, aware of mortality and limitation for the first time, their melancholy made sense. Your sadness makes sense too, not in the same way, not in the same context, but it's the same sadness, the same ancient responses, the same evolutionary heritage, just trying to operate in a world that has changed faster than biology could adapt. So here you are, carrying the weight of 300,000 years of human sadness. Multiple forms, multiple functions, multiple messages, all still active, all still trying to help in the only ways they know how, all still broadcasting signals and forcing reorganization and motivating connection and creating meaning, even when those functions don't quite match the problems you're actually facing. But we're not done. We've traced where sadness comes from. We've identified its different forms. We've understood its purposes. Now we need to look at what happens when you take these ancient emotions and drop them into modern life. When the messages they send don't match the receivers available to hear them. When the functions they're trying to perform don't match the problems you're actually facing. That's where we're going next. Into the mismatch. Into the gap between what sadness evolved to do and what it actually does in your life. Into the strange, difficult territory where ancient emotions meet modern circumstances and create suffering that doesn't quite make sense from either perspective. So settle in, let your breathing slow, the story continues, and with it, perhaps, a deeper understanding of this heavy, ancient, necessary feeling that visits you in the dark. So here's where it gets really complicated, and perhaps really relevant to you lying there tonight, feeling whatever version of sadness has decided to visit. We've traced these sadnesses back to their origins. We understand why they exist, what problems they solved, how they kept your ancestors alive. But that was then. That was the Pleistocene, the small band social world, the environment where sadness made functional sense. Now let's talk about what happens when you take emotional responses calibrated for that world and try to run them in modern life. When ancient signals encounter contexts they were never designed for. When your Pleistocene brain tries to process contemporary circumstances, this is where sadness becomes not just difficult but sometimes seemingly unbearable. Where the gap between what your emotions are trying to do and what they actually accomplish creates suffering that feels both inevitable and pointless. Let's start with grief, the most primal sadness, the one that should be most straightforward. Someone dies. You grieve. Your brain reorganizes around their absence. Eventually, the acute phase passes and you learn to function in a world where they no longer exist. But modern grief is different from ancient grief in ways that make it harder to process, harder to resolve, harder to complete the work that grief evolved to do. Picture yourself in the days after someone important to you has died, maybe a parent, maybe a partner, maybe a close friend, and you're trying to grieve. Your body is trying to do what it evolved to do. Slow down, withdraw. Stop engaging with normal activities so you can focus on the massive reorganization your brain needs to undertake. But the world doesn't stop. Your job still expects you there. Your bills still need paying. Your other responsibilities don't pause just because you're grieving. Modern society, with its relentless pace and its tight economic margins, doesn't really accommodate the kind of extended withdrawal that grief requires. So you try to grieve while also functioning. Try to let your brain do its reorganization work while simultaneously maintaining your usual productivity. And this creates a terrible bind. You can't fully grieve because you can't fully stop. But you also can't fully function because grief keeps pulling you back towards shutdown. Your ancient grief mechanism is trying to force a pause that modern life won't allow. And you end up in this liminal space, neither fully grieving nor fully functioning, just exhausted and diminished and confused about why this feels so impossible. But there's something else, something even more fundamental about how modern grief differs from ancient grief. In the ancient world, death was visible, present. You watched people die, you saw the body, you participated in whatever rituals your group used to mark the transition. You had concrete sensory confirmation that the person was gone. Your brain received clear and ambiguous information. This person no longer exists in the world. In modern life, death is often hidden, sanitized. Someone goes to the hospital and doesn't come back, or they die far away and you just receive a phone call, or you see them one day and then the next day they're gone, and your brain never got that clear sensory confirmation of their absence. You know intellectually that they're dead, but some part of your brain, the part that evolved to process loss through direct observation, hasn't quite accepted it. This creates something psychologists call complicated grief. Grief that doesn't complete its normal arc. because the brain never fully accepted the reality of the loss. You might find yourself expecting to see the person, looking for them in crowds, pulling out your phone to call them before remembering they're gone. Your brain keeps running old patterns, keeps expecting someone who will never appear, and the prediction errors continue indefinitely because the sensory confirmation of death was incomplete. Ancient grief, for all its pain, had closure built in. Modern grief often doesn't, and this lack of closure can extend the acute phase of grief far beyond what evolution prepared you for. Your brain stays in reorganization mode, waiting for information that will never come, unable to complete the update it's trying to perform. And then there's social media. Oh, the strange complications of grieving in the age of digital immortality. The person is gone, but their profile remains. Their photos are still there. Their words still exist, archived and searchable. You can scroll through their entire documented life. You can see comments from people who don't know they're dead. You can watch old videos, hear their voice, see them move. This is unprecedented in human history. In the ancient world, when someone died, they disappeared. Their voice fell silent. Their face faded from memory. The absence was total, and this totality, painful as it were, helped your brain accept the reality. But now absence isn't total. The digital ghost remains, and every time you encounter it, your brain gets confused signals. They're gone, but also still here. Dead, but also still speaking. Absent, but also still present in a strange, disembodied way. This complicates grief in ways we're still learning to understand. Some people find comfort in digital remains. Others find them disturbing, a barrier to the natural process of letting go. But either way, it's a mismatch. Your grief evolved for complete absence, for total loss, and now you're trying to grieve someone who is simultaneously gone and still digitally present. Your ancient brain doesn't have protocols for this situation. Let's shift to a different scenario. A different type of modern sadness. The sadness of defeat, but in a context that makes no evolutionary sense. You're at work. You proposed an idea in a meeting, a project you believed in, a direction you thought the team should take, and it was rejected, not just politely declined, but criticized. Maybe your logic was questioned. Maybe your competence was doubted. Maybe someone else's idea was chosen instead. And it was clear that this represents a status hierarchy where you're below them. And now you feel it. That deflation, that sense of being diminished, that sadness that makes you want to withdraw, to not speak up again, to keep your head down and avoid further conflict. This is defeat sadness, doing exactly what it evolved to do, signaling submission, reducing your assertiveness, protecting you from escalating a status conflict that might become dangerous. But here's the thing, this isn't a real status conflict. Not in the evolutionary sense. No one's survival is at stake. Your access to resources isn't genuinely threatened. Your ability to find mates and reproduce has nothing to do with whether your work proposal was accepted. This is a temporary domain-specific low-stakes interaction in a large, fluid organization where today's hierarchy might be completely different from tomorrow's. And yet your sadness treats it as if it's life or death, as if this defeat matters for your survival, as if you need to submit and withdraw and stay low status for a while to avoid further conflict. Your ancient defeat response is firing at maximum intensity for a situation that barely registers on the scale of actual threats to your well-being. This is the mismatch. Your sadness is calibrated for small, stable groups where status was survival, where defeat could mean permanent loss of access to resources, where conflicts could escalate to violence if not properly resolved through submission signals. But you're operating in a large, complex modern organization where status is fluid and domain-specific, and this particular defeat means almost nothing in the grand scheme of your life, but you don't feel that way. You feel diminished. You feel sad. You want to withdraw. You might replay the interaction obsessively, feeling the humiliation fresh each time. You might avoid similar situations in the future, even though avoiding them might actually harm your career more than the initial defeat did. Your sadness is trying to protect you from a danger that doesn't exist in the form it thinks it does. And in doing so, it might actually be creating problems rather than solving them. Because in modern work contexts, withdrawing after defeat signalling submission, staying low status. These behaviours often don't lead to eventual recovery of status. They lead to being overlooked, sidelined, forgotten. The ancient strategy of temporary submission followed by strategic rebuilding that worked when groups were small and everyone knew everyone, and you'd have opportunities to demonstrate value in other ways. But in modern organisations, if you withdraw and stay low, you might just fade into the background. No one's tracking your eventual recovery. No one's waiting for you to rebuild and try again. They've just moved on, and you're left carrying sadness that's protecting you from consequences that won't actually materialise, while preventing responses that might actually help. Now let's talk about separation sadness in the modern world. This might be the most frequently triggered ancient sadness you experience, firing multiple times a day in response to situations that would never have occurred in the environment it evolved for. You send a text to someone you care about, a friend, a family member, a romantic partner. You're sharing something important, or maybe just checking in, or maybe asking for support with something you're struggling with, and no response. Minutes pass, then hours, then maybe days. You can see they have been online, you can see they've posted other things, but they haven't responded to you, and you feel it. That specific flavour of sadness, the anxiety of separation, the fear that the bond is weakening, the worry that maybe you've done something wrong, maybe they're pulling away, maybe you're being quietly excluded and you didn't even know why. This is separation sadness, doing exactly what it evolved to do, detecting signs of social disconnection and creating enough distress that you're motivated to restore the connection. In the ancient world, if someone was physically distant or wasn't responding to your presence, that was genuinely dangerous information. It meant your social bonds were weakening. It meant you might end up alone. It meant you needed to act quickly to rebuild the relationship before the separation became permanent. But a text going unanswered doesn't actually mean any of that. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they saw it and meant to respond later and forgot. Maybe they're dealing with their own difficulties and don't have energy for social interaction right now. Maybe they have complex feelings about the topic you raised and need time to formulate a response. There are dozens of possible explanations that have nothing to do with the strength of your bond or your social position, but your sadness doesn't think in terms of dozens of possible explanations. It thinks in terms of one equation: lack of response equals weakening bond equals danger. And it creates distress proportionate to ancient stakes, not modern reality. This happens constantly in modern life. You're left on red and you feel sad. You don't get invited to something and you feel sad. You post something online and fewer people engage with it than you expected, and you feel sad. Your separation sadness is firing over and over, treating every minor social signal as if it's evidence of dangerous disconnection, even though the actual stability of your social network might be completely unchanged. And here's what makes this worse. In the ancient world, if you felt separation sadness, the solution was clear. Go find the group. Reconnect physically. Re-establish bonds through direct interaction. The sadness motivated a specific, achievable action, and when you completed that action, the sadness resolved. But in modern life, the solution isn't clear. You can't just reconnect by force. You can't show up at someone's house and demand they process their feelings about your text message. You can't make people engage with your social media posts. You can't force inclusion in social events you weren't invited to. The separation sadness creates distress, but doesn't provide a functional path to resolving that distress. So you're stuck, feeling sad, feeling disconnected, feeling socially anxious, but without clear actions you can take to fix it. Your sadness is motivating you to do something, anything to restore connection. But the modern social context is too complex and too mediated for simple reconnection strategies to work. And sometimes the things your separation sadness motivates you to do actually make things worse. You send too many messages seeming desperate or needy. You engage in attention-seeking behaviour that pushes people away rather than drawing them closer. You interpret ambiguous social signals as rejection and respond defensively, creating actual conflict where none existed before. Your ancient solution to separation, that desperate drive to reconnect, it can backfire in a modern context where people value independence and autonomy and don't respond well to intensity of need. You're trying to solve a problem using tools that were calibrated for a different kind of social world, and the result is often more sadness, not less. Let's look at another modern context where ancient sadness creates disproportionate suffering. The sadness that comes from comparison, from seeing what others have that you don't, from feeling like you're falling behind in some undefined race. You're scrolling through social media, maybe Instagram, maybe Facebook, maybe some other platform, and you see someone's life, their vacation photos, their career success, their relationship milestones, their beautiful home, their thriving children, their apparently perfect existence, and you feel it, that sinking feeling, that sense that you're not measuring up, that your life is smaller, sadder, less successful than it should be. This connects to both defeat sadness and separation sadness. The comparison creates a sense of lower status, of having lost some invisible competition, and it also creates a sense of disconnection, of being left behind while others move forward into happiness you can't access. But here's the thing, in the ancient world, social comparison was limited to your actual group. You saw how the 20 or 50 or 100 people you lived with were doing, and that information was accurate. You knew what they had because you could observe it directly. You knew their struggles because you lived alongside them. You had context for their successes and failures because you witnessed the whole story, not just the highlight reel. This made social comparison useful. It gave you accurate information about relative status. It helped you understand where you stood in the hierarchy. It motivated appropriate levels of effort and competition. The sadness you felt when you perceived yourself as lower status, that sadness was based on real information about real relative positions in a real knowable social structure. But social media comparison isn't real in the same way. You're comparing your entire life, including all the boring and difficult parts you experience directly, to carefully curated representations of other people's lives, edited to show only the best moments and hide the struggles. You're comparing reality to performance, behind the scenes to highlight reel, and worse, you're comparing yourself to hundreds or thousands of people, most of whom you don't actually know, across contexts that have nothing to do with your actual social world or survival prospects. Someone you went to high school with 20 years ago posts about their success, and your sadness treats this as relevant information about your relative status. Even though you live in different cities and work in different fields and will probably never see each other again, your sadness is trying to process social information using ancient algorithms that assumed all comparison was local, accurate, and relevant. But modern comparison is global, distorted, and largely meaningless for your actual survival or well-being. Yet it triggers the same sadness, the same sense of diminishment, the same motivation to withdraw, or to try harder, or to feel inadequate. And the worst part is, you know this. Consciously, intellectually, you understand that social media is curated, that everyone's life has struggles they don't post, that comparison is meaningless across such different contexts. But knowing this doesn't stop the sadness, doesn't prevent your ancient status tracking mechanisms from firing and creating that sinking, diminished feeling. Your conscious understanding and your emotional response are operating on different systems. Your conscious mind knows social media isn't real. Your emotional brain treats it as if it's the most important social information it has access to. And you're stuck in the middle, feeling sad for reasons you can consciously recognize as irrational, but can't emotionally dismiss. Now let's talk about perhaps the most pervasive modern sadness, the one that doesn't come from any specific trigger but just is, the background sadness, the quiet melancholy, the sense that something is wrong even though you can't identify what. You're lying in bed at night. Nothing bad has happened today. No one died. You didn't experience defeat. You're not separated from anyone important. You weren't rejected or humiliated. By any objective measure, things are okay. maybe even good. You have a roof over your head, food to eat, people who care about you, basic security, and yet you feel sad. That low-grade, persistent, hard-to-explain sadness that doesn't have a clear cause but colours everything slightly grey. That makes it harder to feel motivated or excited or engaged. That creates a sense of heaviness even when nothing heavy is actually pressing on you. This might be existential sadness, that uniquely human awareness of limitation and mortality and meaninglessness amplified by modern conditions that make these existential facts harder to ignore or transcend through simple survival activities. In the ancient world, life was hard in ways that were immediate and concrete. You were busy surviving, finding food, staying safe, managing relationships, taking care of children, dealing with the constant demands of existence in a world without modern conveniences. There wasn't much time or energy left over for existential contemplation. The meaning of your life was given by the immediate demands of staying alive. But in modern life, especially in affluent societies, basic survival is often secured. You have time, you have energy, you have the cognitive bandwidth to think about questions beyond immediate necessity. And with that bandwidth comes awareness. Awareness of your own mortality. Awareness that your life might not matter in any cosmic sense. Awareness that you're just one person in billions, living on one planet in an incomprehensibly vast universe. And nothing you do will ultimately change the trajectory of entropy and decay that defines physical reality. This awareness creates existential sadness, and modern life amplifies it in specific ways. You're exposed to global news, constant reminders of suffering and injustice and catastrophe that you're powerless to affect. You're confronted with the vastness of human knowledge and achievement, which makes your own contributions feel infinitesimal. You're aware of climate change and political instability, and all the large-scale problems that threaten collective futures while remaining beyond individual control. Your ancestors didn't have to carry this weight. They weren't aware of global problems they couldn't solve. They weren't confronted daily with evidence of their own cosmic insignificance. They weren't expected to find meaning in a universe that provides none. Their sadness was about specific, tangible losses. Your sadness is about the human condition itself. And then there's the isolation of modern life, which interacts with existential sadness in difficult ways. You're aware of being a conscious, finite being, and you're also increasingly alone with that awareness. You don't live in a small group with constant social contact and shared rituals that help process difficult existential facts. You live in a society where people are often isolated, where shared meaning-making has fractured, where traditional sources of existential comfort, religion, community, ritual, have weakened for many people without being replaced by equally effective alternatives. So you lie there, feeling sad, and you don't know why. Nothing specific is wrong, but everything feels slightly wrong. And the vague, diffuse sadness is perhaps the hardest type to address because it doesn't point to any clear problem or solution. It's just the weight of being human in a world that's become aware of its own meaninglessness, without developing new ways to create meaning. Let's look at one more modern context where ancient sadness creates suffering. The sadness that comes from ambiguity, from not knowing, from situations that remain unresolved indefinitely. Someone you care about is pulling away. Maybe a friendship is fading. Maybe a romantic relationship is ending. Maybe a family connection is weakening. But it's not a clean break. It's not dramatic or final. It's just slowly diminishing. Text messages getting shorter. Plans becoming less frequent. The emotional intensity draining away in a way you can feel but can't quite pinpoint or address. And you're sad. But it's a strange kind of sadness. Not quite grief because the relationship hasn't ended. Not quite separation because you're not completely disconnected. Not quite defeat because there hasn't been a conflict. Just this ambiguous, hanging sadness that comes from not knowing where you stand or what's happening, or whether to try to fix something that might not be fixable, or might not even be broken, just changing in ways you don't like but can't control. This ambiguous sadness would rarely have occurred in ancient contexts. Relationships were clear, present or absent, alive or dead, connected or disconnected. The face-to-face nature of ancient social life meant you knew where you stood with people. You could read their body language, their tone, their level of engagement. Ambiguity was minimal because observation was direct. But modern relationships, especially those mediated by technology or stretched across distance, are full of ambiguity. You don't know if someone's lack of response means they're busy or upset with you or just overwhelmed with life. You don't know if a relationship is ending or just changing. You don't know if you should fight for connection or gracefully let go. And this not knowing creates a specific kind of sadness that your brain struggles to process because it evolved for clarity, for definitive information, for situations that resolved one way or another. Your sadness is trying to motivate some response, but it doesn't know what response. It's trying to signal your distress, but it doesn't know who to signal to. It's trying to force reorganization, but it doesn't know what to reorganize around, so it just persists, creating discomfort without providing direction, making you feel bad without helping you feel better. So here you are, carrying ancient sadnesses into a modern world that triggers them constantly in ways they were never designed to handle. Grief without but closure, defeat without real status consequences, separation without actual disconnection, comparison without accuracy or relevance, existential awareness without meaning-making structures, ambiguity without resolution. Every day, multiple times a day, your sadness is firing, trying to do the work it evolved to do: signal, slow you down, motivate reconnection, force processing, test bonds, create meaning. But the context has changed so much that these functions often don't work. The signals go unread. The slowing down causes problems rather than solving them. The motivation to reconnect leads to behaviors that push people away. The force processing never completes because the information isn't clear. The bond testing happens in relationships where the ancient assumptions don't apply. The meaning-making occurs in a void where traditional answers feel empty. Your sadness is trying, is doing its best with the tools evolution gave it, but those tools were crafted for a different world, a simpler world in some ways, a world where loss was concrete and status was clear and connection was obvious and meaning was given by the demands of survival. That world is gone, but the sadness remains, ancient, persistent, still trying to help in the only ways it knows how, still broadcasting signals to a world that doesn't quite know how to receive them anymore. And this mismatch, this gap between what your sadness is trying to do and what it actually accomplishes, this is why modern sadness can feel so overwhelming, so pointless, so much like suffering without function. Because the function is still there, still operating, but the context has changed so much that the function often fails to achieve anything except more suffering. But here's what you need to understand, what you need to really absorb as you're lying there, feeling whatever sadness has visited you tonight. This isn't your fault. The mismatch isn't evidence that you're broken or weak or doing something wrong. You're just a human, carrying human sadness, trying to navigate a world that changed faster than evolution could adapt to. Your sadness made sense for 300,000 years. It kept your ancestors alive. It helped them process loss and navigate hierarchies and maintain connections and create meaning. It worked brilliantly in the context it evolved for. It's not your sadness that's the problem. It's the mismatch between your sadness and your world, between ancient emotions and modern contexts, between evolutionary programming and contemporary reality. And understanding this mismatch, recognizing it, seeing clearly how your sadness is trying to help in ways that don't quite work anymore, that's the first step toward making peace with it. Not eliminating it, not pretending it doesn't hurt, but perhaps suffering a little less from the suffering. Perhaps adding a little less judgment and confusion on top of the weight you're already carrying. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body soften. The sadness is still there. It probably will be for a while. That's okay. It's just doing what it evolved to do, and you You're doing what you evolved to do too. Surviving, adapting, carrying the weight of being human in a world that your ancestors couldn't have imagined, but that you have to navigate anyway. In a few moments, we're going to look at something different, something perhaps more hopeful. Not how to eliminate sadness, because you can't, but how to work with it, how to recognize what it's trying to do, how to respond to its signals without being controlled by them, how to carry this ancient inheritance with a little more grace and a little less struggle. But for now, just rest, just breathe. The hardest part of the night is behind you. What comes next is gentler, more philosophical, an invitation to see your sadness not as an enemy, but as an inheritance. Difficult, yes. Heavy, absolutely. But also connecting you to everyone who came before, everyone who felt this same weight and survived anyway. Your sadness is ancient. Your struggle with it is modern. But you, lying there in the dark, feeling both, you're the bridge between then and now, between what we were and what we're becoming. And that's hard. But it's also, in a strange way, exactly what it means to be human right now, in this moment, in this world that hasn't quite caught up with what we are. So we've spent hours now walking through sadness, where it came from, what it was for, how it misfires in modern life, how it creates suffering that seems disproportionate to any clear cause. And you might be thinking, okay, I understand my sadness better now, but I still don't like it. I still wish it would go away. I still want to know what to do with this feeling. And that's fair. That's fair. Understanding doesn't automatically equal comfort. Knowing why you feel sad doesn't make sadness feel good. But here's what we haven't talked about yet. Here's the part that might surprise you. Sadness, this inheritance you didn't ask for and can't return, has given you gifts. Real gifts. Things that make you more fully human. Things you wouldn't want to lose even if you could. This isn't toxic positivity. This isn't pretending that sadness is wonderful and you should be grateful for suffering. This is something more nuanced. An acknowledgement that sadness, as difficult as it is, has been intimately connected to some of the most valuable human capacities for as long as humans have been human. Let's start with depth, with the capacity to feel things deeply, to care about things enough that their loss matters. Think about it. The opposite of sadness isn't just happiness, it's flatness, emotional numbness, the inability to be affected by loss because nothing matters enough to lose. You can only be sad if you were first capable of attachment, if you first cared about something or someone deeply enough that their absence creates that heavy, slowing weight. Your sadness is proof that you're capable of depth, that you form real bonds, that you invest in things beyond immediate survival, that your emotional life has richness and complexity. The people who never feel sad, who remain emotionally flat regardless of what happens, they're not living richer lives than you. They're living shallower ones. This matters more than you might think. The capacity for deep feeling, including deep sadness, is what allowed humans to form the kinds of complex, lasting social bonds that made civilization possible. It's what allowed parents to invest years of effort in raising children who wouldn't be self-sufficient for decades. It's what allowed people to create art and music and stories that move others. It's what allowed the development of empathy, compassion, love. You can't have any of those things without the capacity for sadness. They are package deals. If you could press a button and eliminate your ability to feel sad, you would also be eliminating your ability to feel the things that make sadness possible. The attachments, the investments, the caring. And life without those things wouldn't be better. It would just be less vibrant, less meaningful, less human. Your sadness is the price you pay for being able to care, and caring, despite its costs, is what makes life worth living. The weight you feel, that heaviness that visits you in moments like this, it's not separate from your capacity for joy or love or connection. It's the shadow side of those capacities, the necessary counterpoint, the evidence that you're living a life rich enough to include loss. Now let's talk about empathy, about your ability to understand and connect with others' suffering. People who've experienced profound sadness, who've felt the weight of grief or defeat or separation or existential melancholy, They have a different kind of understanding than people who haven't. They recognize sadness in others. They can sit with someone else's pain without trying to fix it or dismiss it. They don't tell people to cheer up or look on the bright side or be grateful for what they have. They understand from the inside that sadness doesn't work that way. This creates connection. Real, deep, authentic connection. Because people who are sad, they can tell the difference between someone who intellectually understands sadness and someone who's lived it. They can feel the difference between "I'm sorry you're going through this" and "I know how hard this is because I've been there too." Your sadness has taught you to be present with others' sadness, to not minimize it, to not rush to solutions, to simply be there. Acknowledging that yes, this is heavy, yes, it makes sense that you're struggling, yes, you're not alone in feeling this way, and this is a gift. One you paid for with your own suffering, with your own nights lying awake feeling that weight, with your own days when everything felt harder than it should be. But it's still a gift, the capacity to truly understand what others are going through, to connect at the level of shared vulnerability, to build relationships based on authentic recognition of struggle, rather than performance of having everything together. And this empathy extends beyond sadness itself. Because once you understand that your own emotional experience is complex and sometimes contradictory, that you can know something intellectually while feeling something different emotionally, that you can want to feel better while also not being able to just snap out of it, you become better at understanding others' complexity too. You stop judging people for not getting over things. You recognize that change is hard even when it's clearly necessary. You understand that people can be simultaneously strong and struggling, capable and overwhelmed, doing their best and still falling short. You extend grace because you know how much you need grace extended to you. Your sadness has taught you emotional complexity, nuance, the recognition that human experience doesn't fit into simple categories or easy explanations, and this understanding makes you better at being human with other humans, better at connection, better at compassion, better at the kind of relationships that actually matter. Let's talk about wisdom, about the kind of understanding that can only come from having experienced difficulty and survived it. There's a particular kind of knowledge that you can only gain through suffering. Not intellectual knowledge, not facts you can learn from books, but experiential wisdom. The kind that changes how you see the world and your place in it. The kind that only comes from having walked through dark valleys and emerged on the other side. Sadness forces this kind of learning. When you're in the midst of grief or defeat or separation or existential crisis, your brain is doing more than just processing the immediate loss. It's reorganizing your understanding of reality. It's testing assumptions you didn't know you had. It's revealing what actually matters versus what you thought mattered. It's showing you what you're capable of enduring. And when you come through sadness, when you survive something that felt unsurvivable, you come out changed. Not damaged necessarily, though the experience might have been damaging, but changed. You know things now that you didn't know before, about yourself, about others, about the nature of loss and resilience and the strange human capacity to keep going even when everything feels impossible. This is what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where people who've experienced significant difficulty often report in retrospect that they grew from it, that they learned things they couldn't have learned any other way, that they developed capacities they didn't know they needed, that they discovered strengths they didn't know they had. Your sadness is creating opportunities for this kind of growth every time it visits. Every time you feel that weight and keep going anyway. Every time you sit with discomfort without being destroyed by it. Every time you process loss and emerge, eventually, able to function in a changed world. You're building wisdom, you're developing resilience, you're learning what you're made of. This doesn't mean sadness is good. It doesn't mean you should seek suffering or celebrate difficulty, but it does mean that the sadness you've experienced hasn't been wasted. It's taught you things, changed you in ways that, difficult as the lessons were, have made you more capable, more understanding, more aware of what matters, more equipped to handle future difficulties because you've proven to yourself that you can handle difficulty. Now let's talk about meaning, about the relationship between sadness and the human search for purpose. People who never question things, who never feel existential sadness, who never struggle with the big questions about why we're here and what matters and whether anything we do has lasting significance, they often don't spend much time thinking about meaning. They just live, unexamined, unchallenged by doubt, not wrestling with the fundamental questions of existence. But people who feel sad, especially existential sadness, they become philosophers by necessity. They have to think about meaning. They have to grapple with questions about value and purpose and what makes life worth living despite its inevitable end. They can't just coast on inherited answers or social defaults. The sadness pushes them to examine, to question, to search for something that feels true rather than just comfortable. This search, uncomfortable as it is, often leads to a more intentional, more examined, more meaningful life. Not because sadness creates meaning directly, but because it creates the discomfort that motivates meaning-making. The existential ache that won't let you settle for surface-level existence. Many of the most profound human achievements, works of art and philosophy and literature and music that speak to something deep in the human experience, they came from people who struggled with sadness, who felt that existential weight, who couldn't ignore the big questions even when ignoring them would have been more comfortable. Their sadness pushed them to create, to search, to build something that might transcend the individual suffering and speak to universal human experiences. Your sadness might be asking you similar questions, hard questions, questions about what matters to you, what you value enough to feel sad about losing it, what kind of life feels worth living despite the guarantee of loss and limitation and eventual death. These questions are uncomfortable, but they're also the questions that lead to depth, to intentionality, to lives that feel meaningful rather than just busy. The sadness is the question. The meaning you create is the answer. Not a final answer, not a perfect answer, but your answer, built from your own examination of what matters to you. And that answer, however incomplete, is more authentic than any meaning you could have borrowed from others without first feeling the sadness that demands you find something true for yourself. Let's shift now to something from contemporary research, something that might help you understand your sadness in a new way. Neuroscientists have discovered something fascinating about people who've experienced significant sadness and worked through it rather than being overwhelmed by it. Their brains actually change, not in the sense of damage, but in the sense of increased capacity. The regions involved in emotional regulation, in processing complex information, in maintaining executive function during stress. They show increased activity and connectivity after someone has successfully navigated sadness. This is called stress-induced neural plasticity, and it suggests that sadness, when you work with it rather than being consumed by it, actually makes your brain more capable, stronger, more resilient, better equipped to handle future emotional challenges. Think of it like exercise for your emotional regulation systems. When you experience sadness and find ways to function despite it, when you sit with the discomfort without being destroyed, when you process the loss and eventually reorganize around it, your brain is building new capacity, new neural pathways, better regulation systems, stronger executive control. This is why people who have been through difficulty and survived it often handle future difficulties better. It's not just psychological resilience, it's neurological adaptation. Their brains have literally built new infrastructure to handle emotional challenge more effectively. Your sadness, then, isn't just something to endure. It's something that, if you engage with it properly, makes you neurologically more capable. Every time you feel sad and don't let it completely shut you down, every time you function despite the weight, every time you process loss without being destroyed by it, you're building brain architecture that will serve you for the rest of your life. And there's research on something else. Something about the relationship between sadness and creativity. Between melancholy and insight. Studies have shown that mild to moderate sadness actually enhances certain types of thinking. Analytical thinking, detail-oriented processing, the ability to identify problems and generate solutions. While happiness tends to promote broad, creative, exploratory thinking, sadness promotes focused, careful, thorough thinking. This makes evolutionary sense. When you're sad, especially after a loss or defeat, you need to figure out what went wrong. You need to analyze the situation carefully. You need to identify problems and generate new strategies. Sadness creates the mental state that supports this kind of thinking. But it also means that your sadness, uncomfortable as it is, might be making you better at certain cognitive tasks, more careful in your analysis, more thorough in your problem solving, more aware of potential pitfalls. The same sadness that makes you feel slow and heavy is also paradoxically making you more precise and thorough in your thinking. This doesn't mean sadness makes you smarter or more creative overall, but it does suggest that different emotional states support different kinds of thinking. And sadness, for all its difficulty, has cognitive benefits that happiness doesn't provide. The depth of processing, the careful attention to detail, the willingness to sit with problems rather than glossing over them. Your sadness might be helping you think in ways that only sadness can support, helping you see things you'd miss if you were always happy, helping you process complexity that requires the kind of careful, focused attention that sadness provides. Now let's talk about something practical, something you can actually do with sadness when it visits. Not to make it go away, because you can't always do that, but to work with it rather than against it, to respond to its signals without being controlled by them. First, recognition. When sadness arises, notice it. Name it. This is sadness. Not judgment, not analysis. Just recognition. Your body is activating an ancient response and your nervous system is doing what it evolved to do. This is sadness. This simple act of recognition creates a tiny bit of space, a moment where you're observing the sadness rather than being completely consumed by it. You're not the sadness, you're the person experiencing sadness. That distinction matters. Second, curiosity. Instead of immediately trying to make the sadness stop, get interested in it. What kind of sadness is this? Is it grief, defeat, separation, existential, some combination? Understanding which type of sadness you're experiencing helps you recognize whether it's proportionate to the situation. If you're feeling separation sadness because someone didn't respond to a text, you can recognize that your ancient alarm system is firing at maximum intensity for a situation that doesn't actually threaten your survival. This doesn't make the sadness disappear, but it changes your relationship with it. You can acknowledge, my body thinks I'm being abandoned by the group, but I know I'm actually safe. This feeling will pass. I don't need to act as if the danger is real. Third, acceptance. Not resignation, not giving up, but genuine acceptance that sadness is part of your experience, that it will visit you sometimes, that it's not a sign of weakness or failure. It's just what happens when you have a human nervous system in a human body trying to navigate a complex world. Acceptance doesn't mean liking sadness or wanting it. It means stopping the fight against its existence, stopping the layer of suffering that comes from believing you shouldn't feel this way. Sadness is uncomfortable enough on its own. The self-judgment about feeling sad makes it worse. When you can feel sad without also feeling ashamed of being sad, when you can experience heaviness without the meta-sadness about experiencing heaviness, the overall burden decreases. Not eliminated, but lighter, more manageable. Fourth, self-compassion. Speak to yourself the way you'd speak to someone you love who is struggling. Not, what's wrong with you? But this is really hard. I understand why you're sad. It makes sense given what you're experiencing. Your ancestors survived because they took their sadness seriously, because they recognized it as important information, because they responded to it with support rather than contempt. You deserve the same response from yourself. When sadness is particularly heavy, when you're really struggling, remind yourself, every ancestor I have made it through their sadness. Every single one. And I come from an unbroken line of people who survived despite feeling this weight. I can do this too. Fifth, function despite the feeling. Not pretend the sadness isn't there, not try to force yourself to feel different, but practice doing things while sad. Small things, manageable things, things that need doing even though you don't feel like doing them. Each time you function, despite sadness, you're teaching your brain that sadness, while real, doesn't have to control you. You're building evidence that you can handle discomfort. That heaviness doesn't mean inability, that you're more capable than your sadness wants you to believe. This is gradual. This is patient work. But over time, over many small acts of functioning, while sad, the sadness loses some of its power, not all of it. You'll probably always feel sad sometimes, but its ability to shut you down completely, to dictate your choices, to keep you trapped in withdrawal, that diminishes. And finally, meaning-making. Use the sadness. Let it teach you what matters. Let it show you what you value enough to feel sad about losing. Let it push you to examine your life and ask whether you're living in ways that align with what you care about. Sadness points to what matters. If you're sad about a loss, that tells you that a relationship mattered. If you're sad about a defeat, that tells you the goal mattered. If you're sad about separation, that tells you connection matters. If you're sad existentially, that tells you meaning matters. Listen to these signals, not as commands, but as information. Your sadness is telling you something about your values, your priorities, your needs. It's not always right. It sometimes points to things that mattered in evolutionary context but don't matter now. But it's always worth considering what your sadness is trying to tell you about what you care about. Let's pause here. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body soften into whatever's holding you. The sadness we've been exploring in all its forms and functions and misfires, it's not your enemy. It's not evidence of failure. It's just your ancient inheritance, trying to do the work it evolved to do in a world that has changed faster than biology could adapt. You can work with it, not eliminate it, not pretend it doesn't exist, but recognize it for what it is, understand what it's trying to do, respond to its signals without being controlled by them, function despite the weight, and find meaning in the fact that you can feel deeply enough to experience this kind of sadness at all. As you're lying there now, feeling whatever you're feeling, perhaps you can soften toward it. Not embrace it, not welcome it, but stop fighting it quite so hard. Let it be there. Let yourself be warned without needing to fix it immediately. Let your body run through its ancient protocols while your conscious mind knows you're safe. The sadness will pass. It always does. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but it passes. Because sadness is designed to be temporary. It's meant to activate in response to loss or change or difficulty, and then subside when the processing is complete, or the situation resolves, or you simply can't sustain that level of intensity anymore. Your body knows how to do this. You don't have to force it. You just have to allow it. And while you're waiting for the sadness to pass, while you're sitting with the discomfort, perhaps you can remember that this feeling, difficult as it is part of what makes you human. Part of what connects you to the long chain of humanity stretching back through time. Your sadness is old, older than language, older than civilization, older than anything you might consider modern human culture. It's been with your species for hundreds of thousands of years, and it's still here, still functioning, still trying to help you navigate loss and change, and the fundamental difficulties of being alive and aware, and caring about things deeply enough that their loss matters. That's remarkable when you think about it, that something so ancient can persist so clearly in modern consciousness, that your body remembers things your mind has forgotten, that evolution has written its lessons so deeply into your biology that they continue to shape your experience every single day. You're a walking archive of human emotional history, a living museum of evolutionary adaptations, and sadness is one of the exhibits, one of the artifacts, a reminder that you come from survivors, that survival for a very long time required the capacity to feel loss deeply enough to process it properly, to signal need clearly enough to get support, to reorganize thoroughly enough to function in a changed world. It's okay if you don't feel grateful for this inheritance right now. It's okay if you still wish you didn't have to feel this way. The goal isn't to love your sadness. The goal is just to understand it, to recognize it for what it is, to stop adding judgment on top of discomfort, to make peace, not with sadness itself, but with the fact that sadness is part of your experience as a human being. And maybe, on the best days, you can see your sadness as a strange kind of companion. Not a friend exactly, but something familiar. Something that's been with you your entire life and will be with you until the end. Something that, despite the discomfort it causes, has also taught you things, deepened you, made you more capable of empathy and wisdom and connection than you might have been without it. The night is almost over now, not the literal night, perhaps, but the night of our journey together through the landscape of sadness. We've walked a long way, from the first emergence of grief in social primates to the complex existential melancholy of modern humans, from ancient adaptive functions to contemporary misfires, from the weight of loss to the possibility of growth. You're still here, still listening, still breathing. The sadness that might have brought you to this moment, that might be with you even now, it hasn't destroyed you. It never will, because you're made of the same stuff as all your ancestors who survived their sadness. You carry their resilience, their strength, their capacity to endure. Tomorrow the sadness might return, probably will return in one form or another. That's okay. It's just doing what it evolved to do. And you know now where it comes from, what it's trying to accomplish, why it sometimes misfires, how to recognize it without being controlled by it. You have tools now, understanding, perspective, the knowledge that your sadness is ancient and automatic and not always accurate, that you can feel sad while knowing you're ultimately safe. That depth of feeling isn't weakness but capacity, that the weight you carry is proof that you can care deeply enough for things to matter, and you have company. Every person on earth carries similar sadness, ancient weight from ancient times, still present, still trying to do the work it evolved for. We're all walking around with emotions calibrated for worlds that don't exist anymore, all struggling sometimes with the mismatch between what we feel and what's actually dangerous. Your sadness doesn't make you alone, it connects you to humanity past and present, to everyone who's ever felt this weight in the darkness, to the fundamental vulnerability of being alive and aware and caring about things enough that their loss can slow you down. So rest now, let your body soften, let the weight settle. Your sadness has served its purpose for tonight. It's signaled what needed signaling. It's forced processing of what needed processing. It's tested the bonds it needed to test. It's done its ancient work as best it can in this modern moment. And now it can rest. And so can you. The woman sitting by the fire 150,000 years ago, feeling grief for her lost child, she eventually stood up, eventually returned to the group, eventually found ways to function in a world that had changed. The sadness had done its work, had given her time to reorganize, had signaled her need to the group, had forced the processing that let her continue. You're doing the same work, in a different time, at different place, with different types of losses and different social structures and different contexts for meaning making. But the work is the same. Processing, reorganizing, signaling, continuing despite the weight. And just like her, eventually you'll stand up. Eventually you'll return to whatever your version of the group is. Eventually you'll find ways to function in your changed world. The sadness will have done its work. Given you time, forced processing, taught you what it needed to teach. Not quickly, not easily, not without ongoing struggle, but eventually, because that's what sadness evolved to do, not to trap you forever, not to break you permanently, but to slow you down long enough to reorganize, to signal long enough to get support, to test bonds thoroughly enough to know they're real, to create discomfort strong enough to motivate meaning making, and then, having done that work, to release you, to let you continue, to allow you to carry forward the lessons learned, the growth achieved, the depth gained, into whatever comes next. Tomorrow you'll wake up and the sadness might still be there, quieter perhaps, but present. That's okay. It's just your ancient inheritance keeping watch, doing the work it's always done, trying in its clumsy ancient way to help you navigate a world that has changed beyond recognition, but that still requires the capacity to feel deeply, to care genuinely, to process loss thoroughly. Thank your sadness if you can. Thank it for keeping your ancestors alive long enough to create the unbroken chain that eventually produced you. Thank it for the depth it represents, the capacity for feeling, the proof that you can care. Thank it for the empathy it's taught you, the wisdom it's built, the meaning it's pushed you to create. And then, having thanked it, let it rest. Because whatever it's trying to protect you from, whatever ancient dangers it's warning about, they're not here tonight. Not in the form it expects, not requiring the response it's prepared to give. You're safe. You've always been safe, at least in the ways that ancient sadness understands safety. The predators are gone. The group is not abandoning you. The hierarchy is not as rigid or consequential as it thinks. The meaning you need is yours to create. And the losses you've suffered, real as they are, have not destroyed you. You're still here, still capable of feeling, still processing, still growing, still human in all the complicated, difficult, beautiful ways that humans are human. Sleep well, dream deeply. Your sadness has done its job for tonight. It's carried you through the dark, shown you what matters, forced the processing that needed forcing, connected you to the long human story of feeling deeply enough that loss leaves marks. And now, finally, you can rest. The long night is over. The weight can soften. The vigilance can ease. Just for tonight. Just for now. Everything else can wait until morning. Rest, fellow survivor. Rest, carrier of ancient sadness. Rest, beautiful, brave human, feeling deeply in a world that doesn't always honour depth. Your ancestors would recognise what you're going through, would understand the weight, would know that what you're feeling tonight, they felt too, in their own ways, in their own times. And they survived it, carried it forward, passed it to you along with their resilience, their strength, their capacity to keep going despite the weight. You carry that capacity too. You've proven it tonight. By making it this far, by staying present with difficult feelings, by not giving up even when the sadness made everything feel impossible. Good night. May your dreams be gentle. May your rest be deep. May tomorrow find you a little lighter, a little stronger, a little more at peace with the ancient inheritance of feeling things deeply enough that their loss can slow you down. The sadness that visited you tonight, it's not a flaw. It's not evidence of weakness. It's proof that you're human, fully, completely, authentically human, capable of depth and connection and meaning and all the things that make being alive worth the difficulty. And that's enough. That's everything. Sleep now.